Whew. A win is a win. A game winner is a game winner, Seamus. That is all I have to say, I think.
Yeah, that's what the theme has been in January. A win is a win because can we do it comfortably anymore? Just after I know we do it
Uh,
comfortably every other game, but can we do it for 2 games in a row? Can we do it comfortably? I mean,
we were
last game was 22. Tonight was 20
two.
less, just two.
We were about 0.2 seconds away from having a whole different vibe. Excuse me. On this post game show. But what is going on, everybody? Welcome back in to the Celtics Talk Weekly post game show. I am your host, Rob Haytayan. Join with me as my co-host. You guys know him, Xavier Zarlingo. Guys, tonight the Boston Celtics, they were able to escape with a very narrow win thanks to our two all-stars, Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum, the two of them coming up very clutch down the stretch. JB with a bucket to give Boston a 2-point lead with 32 seconds remaining left in this game. And obviously Jayson Tatum with the go-ahead game winner to beat New Orleans. 118-116 was your final score. Seamus, obviously a win is a win, and you prefer to win these types of games and lose these types of games. However, I am interested to know your thoughts and takeaways from tonight.
Well, tonight's game, it was, well, as predicted from the Boston Celtics, specifically in the month of January to round out the month of January tonight on January 31st. It's every other game with this team. It's one game you play dominant basketball, the next game you're playing really just not up to par against an inferior opponent. And really, I thought this was not a terrible, terrible game from the Boston Celtics all around. It wasn't a Toronto affair by any metric. It wasn't a Sacramento game by any means whatsoever. It wasn't even the first New Orleans game. If you think back to that 3 game stretch, this game I didn't think had that same vibe to it because really, you look at the individual performances tonight. Many Celtics played well. Kristaps, you see on the top of the screen, he had a great night. Brown and Tatum both. You really said it at the top of the broadcast. They saved the Celtics down the stretch, and ultimately Derek White. We'll get into him later as well. And Sam Hauser off the bench, finally coming off of injury, actually contributed to the Boston Celtics as well. So there were a lot of nice individual performances on the Boston Celtics tonight, but it didn't necessarily culminate in the Celtics dominating this game consistently, and there wasn't too much domination within it at all. Now, it did feel like the Pelicans were playing from behind for most of the night, but the Celtics, they just couldn't get a stop and couldn't quite hit home all of the offensive details in which they needed to put consistent points up on the board. And that's really been the theme of the Celtics team for the past 2 months is, oh, they go on a good defensive stretch and then they can't get the offense right. Oh, they go on a good offensive stretch. They can't get the defense right. And that's what it kind of felt like tonight between the Pelicans and Celtics because the Celtics, yeah, they controlled parts of this game, but the Pelicans were always creeping around, always there to make a stop. The Celtics, they couldn't quite put consistent points up on the board and couldn't quite make consistent stops. And down the stretch, you'd like to see the Celtics again play better because ultimately, the Celtics, if they really handle the details again down the stretch, as we've seen they've actually not done in the month of January whatsoever, they come out of here with a comfortable win. There were a couple of games watching the post games last year at this time of the year. You'd be surprised how many games were actually pretty close. A 5 point game, 3 point game here and there. But the Celtics, it always felt like a comfortable win because they were going ahead and closing out games down the stretch. 4, 5 minutes left, 6 minutes left. The Celtics would really pull ahead, put enough cushion in front of themselves in order to go and win the game. Yet this year, it just feels like the Celtics, they'll put a little bit of that cushion, but then it's eroded right away. And then all of a sudden, we're looking at a game winning scenario down the stretch. Super clutch shot by Jayson Tatum. I would love to see the Celtics going forward and even Jayson Tatum get a better shot in that situation. Finally, the variance is working in his favor from all the past shots. You see Jayson Tatum clank for the win, but this season, 2 game winners for Jayson Tatum already. And really, they weren't great shots, but you're glad they went in because ultimately that splits again 2 losses and 2 wins from the Boston Celtics. And no matter whether the shot was good or not, you just want to take the wins where you can get them. The Celtics, they win back-to-back games yet again tonight. Now they're starting, I would say, a little bit starting to, yeah, last week they won back-to-back games for the first time in nearly a month, and now we did it again. So just saying, maybe a little bit of a change here with the team ultimately. Although I would still say they're a little bit too far, too into still their inconsistent stretch. We expected a
Right.
much bigger win tonight, and it just didn't really play out that way.
No, it didn't. Again, anytime you can win a game like this, you're happy about it, right? Much better to win this type of game than lose this type of game, obviously. It was a weird. So like, you're sitting there and you're watching the game, and we talked about this before we came on. And you're thinking to yourself, like, God, like New Orleans just isn't missing. I mean, Trey Murphy, shout out to him, huge game, 40 points on 75% from the floor. Like, that is ridiculous. And the shots he was making were really just, it was phenomenal to watch him do that. It hurt against our team, but I mean, it was very impressive. So on the one hand, you're like, okay, well, these guys came to play tonight. And then the other hand, you're looking, and you're like, okay, well, Boston, they're turning the ball over. They're giving up some open looks. So I tend to agree with you. I think this was a game that you could, look at and be like, okay, New Orleans, they came to play. Trey Murphy had 40 on 75 from the floor. But to me, I think this was easily preventable from Boston to keep it as at least a larger margin of victory. However, I do like their intents tonight. I thought their energy was there. I'm starting to see that more, but a good win, but not necessarily a win I was expecting to see for out of Boston. In that regard, however, again, anytime an opposing player puts up 40 on 75% shooting from the floor and 67% from three, it's going to be a tough one to win. So credit to Trey Murphy tonight for balling out. From a Celtics standpoint, though, I agree. I really thought individually they were playing very well. They just couldn't tie it to a cohesive game. It felt like it kind of was just all over the place tonight. And that's kind of been a trend that you're seeing with this team. But overall, I didn't hate this game. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. Again, anytime you can win a game like this is a good sign. Now, Seamus, I do want to look at the lead tracker here because this is at least a positive that I look at it from this game. Boston did control this game for pretty much the entire stretch outside of that late first quarter, early second quarter margin. Obviously, New Orleans kind of took the lead midway, a little bit deeper midway into that third quarter for a brief stance there. Obviously, Boston's biggest lead tonight was 9 to New Orleans 6. We had 8 lead changes on the game. So kind of a back and forth game that Boston was able to kind of control. So for you, I know we talked about it a little bit, but was this a game that you're looking at and thinking, okay, this was New Orleans coming to play? Or was this more, okay, Boston, they let New Orleans into this game?
Well, that question I think can only be answered by looking at different portions of the game. Because I think there were times tonight where you looked at what the Celtics did and went, they could definitely be better in this spot. But then there were other times, specifically down the stretch, where you look at New Orleans and they were just hitting impossible shots. I wouldn't say the Celtics defense was as atrocious as it's been this month of January in this game. And a lot of it had to do with tough shot making by the Pelicans down the stretch. But you do look at really the lead tracker and throughout the second quarter, specifically going into halftime. Now the Celtics, they had a good second quarter, but then going into the third quarter, that little stretch right before halftime and then going into the third quarter, it wasn't the best for the Boston Celtics. I thought defensively they let a lot go under their nose, and offensively there were a lot of turnarounds within that stretch right there where you looked at it and went, "Oh, Boston, could they get the lead up to 10? Could they really extend their run right here?" And it just didn't happen, and then the game would swing the other way. And really, I thought tonight there were some moments from Boston like that, but I didn't see it throughout the entire game, which is the point of optimism I will say is going on with the Boston Celtics right now. And even to highlight a couple of players, I think Derek White, he's been playing way, way better as of late. I think that's changing the entire complexity of the team. You think about it, Derek White doesn't show up tonight, Celtics might lose this game. And I know there were other key players within tonight's game, Jaylen Brown as well. I mean, he shot super efficiently from the floor in this particular matchup, and he's not been the whole season's really been for the team and Jaylen Brown very inconsistent this season from both the team and himself individually, but he shoots efficiently tonight. And as I mentioned to start this post game, there are a lot of good individual performances within this particular game that point to the fact that if some of these guys didn't quite have the games that they had, and really games that we haven't been seeing consistently out of them lately, like Jaylen Brown, like Derek White, Celtics, they might actually walk out of New Orleans with a loss. And that's a trend we've been seeing as of late, is just dropping terrible games to terrible teams. I mean, New Orleans, they walked into this matchup with an awful record above 500 for against teams above 500, of course. And the Celtics, they almost let that one slip away from them last time at the Garden. Tonight, you could say quite the same, but I would still say, looking at that lead tracker and even really watching the game, it did feel like the Celtics had control of it. It just didn't feel like they could put the pedal to the floor all the way in order to really go and run out in front of New Orleans. So I do think a lot of it had to do with how hard New Orleans is playing. But there was
Right.
some in there with in terms of how the Celtics played as well. There were specifically that late second quarter, early third quarter. I think the Celtics, they could have really extended their run right there and kind of let the rope go a little bit. And then down the stretch, it was kind of back and forth, but then Celtics, they still had the lead. They still had the lead for most of the time down the stretch. And really, they just let some big shots go in. And I really thought New Orleans, that was just some tough shot making by the Pelicans down the stretch. So it's a little bit of both depending on what part of the game you look at. So there's some points of optimism from the Celtics right here, but you
Right.
also look there's still some negative, inconsistent things going around this Celtics team right now that they certainly need to square away before, I mean, really later in the season going into the playoffs.